to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 94, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. Happy National Sewing Month. I think this is a U.S. holiday, such as it is. If you go to the website nationalsewingmonth.org, there is some background information about this particular designation. Apparently, President Reagan signed this into effect in 1982. It doesn't look like anything has happened with the website or with the organization since about 2021. But the background information is there if you want to take a look at it. And I think no matter where you are in the world, we can all celebrate our sewing. And if September is a good month for you to do that, then I say go right ahead. I have had a busy couple of weeks, and the last 2 episodes were pretty lengthy interview episodes, so I'm going to keep this one a little bit shorter. And this is going to be more of a chatty catch-up episode. I have a list of things that I want to talk about, and I haven't really had time to talk about some of them in the last couple of episodes. So we're going to pretend that we are having coffee together and we're just going to chat, except I'm going to do all the talking. So first of all, some housekeeping stuff. If you didn't see the poll that we did on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, you can go back and look for that post. Maybe we'll repost it. It's just a question about if you would like to be notified when there's a new episode or a blog post. And I did get some responses. I didn't get as many as I thought I might, but the ones that I did were overwhelmingly in favor of that. If you have a preference one way or the other, please let me know. I'm not quite sure when we'll get that set up, but certainly we will aim for the first of the year, if not before. I have a social media person who handles all of my postings, so I would want to coordinate that with her, no matter how we end up doing it. And the second thing is that we're coming up on the 100th episode, which is going to be a listener question episode. So if you have any burning questions that you want to ask about sewing or about me or about anything having to do with this podcast, feel free. I always like feedback, and you can email me at janet@janetzabo.com with any of your questions or comments. So let's jump in. It's been a busy couple of weeks here. Summer finally decided to make an appearance in Northwest Montana. We've had a fairly reasonable summer, all things considered. I think before August, we had only had 1 or 2 90-degree days. And around the middle of August, the heat wave showed up. And up until 2 days ago, it was hot and dry. And we are now in the first week of September, and I am ready for fall. I've mentioned before that my husband and I have pigs and chickens, and the pigs were scheduled to go to the processor at the end of August, but because of my husband's schedule and the processor's schedule, we pushed that back to next week. So the pigs will have been here for an extra couple of weeks by the time we finally send them on their way. And my husband also had to go to Colorado this past week because his father passed away in February, and we've been wrapping up estate stuff, and he needed to go down there to do some repairs and get the house on the market. That's the last thing that has to be done, and so we're hoping to sell the house before the end of the year. So if you're in Woodland Park, Colorado, and looking for a house, hit me up. I'll send you the information. But while my husband was gone, 2 things happened. I had a lot more sewing time, which was good, but I was also solely responsible for all the animals. But he got home yesterday, and I am very grateful to have him back. And even though I can do it, I will happily trade schlepping 40-pound bags of pig feed for cooking and cleaning. So we are back to our normal division of labor here. The other exciting thing that happened this week requires a little bit of backstory. The quilt store where I teach, the Quilt Gallery, offers a lot of retreats. And over the past 2 weeks or so, I'd been hearing murmurings about the retreat, and I assumed that there was a retreat set up by the store, and so I didn't think anything of it. But apparently, there is a fabric store in Frederick, Colorado called Pink Door Fabrics, and they have something called the So Fancy Retreat. This is an annual event, and the way I understand it, the owners of the store were here in Kalispell last year for a Judy Niemeyer quilt retreat. And if you don't know who Judy Niemeyer is, she happens to live here in the valley, and she does the most exquisite paper-pieced medallion-type quilts. I'm not sure medallion is the right description, but the name of her company is Quiltworks, and I will put a link to her website. So the owners of Pink Door Fabrics came up to Kalispell for a Judy Niemeyer retreat, and it was held at Snowline Acres. When we first moved to Montana in 1993, Kalispell Lumber Company was a huge old building on the west side of Kalispell, and after the company closed down, the building sat unused for a number of years until a couple bought the building, dismantled it, and had it moved to a piece of property south of Kalispell. And it was rebuilt as Snowline Acres. My husband actually did some of the concrete there, a few small jobs after the building was reconstructed. And 5 years ago, in October of 2020, we had our older daughter's wedding reception there. I will put a link to their website too so that you can see it. It is just a stunning venue. It has a huge bank of windows on the east side of the building that look east toward the Swan Mountains, and we are almost directly across. If you're standing at those windows and looking at the mountains, you're probably looking at the area where my house is. So the owners of Pink Door Fabrics decided to have their So Fancy retreat at Snowline Acres, and it was held last weekend over Labor Day. And I think one or two of you podcast listeners may have been at that retreat. And if you were, I hope that you had an absolutely marvelous time. The owners of Pink Door have a little pop-up shop in association with their retreat, and they opened the pop-up shop to the community. So I went into town on Sunday afternoon and stopped in to do a little bit of shopping, and I spoke to Chelsea, the owner, and I got a quick peek through the doorway at all of the sewists who were in the main room, and they looked like they were all having a great time. So I think it was a very successful retreat for Pink Door Fabrics, and I'm glad to have them on my radar now. They had 2 special teachers there in addition to Judy Niemeyer. They had Annie Unrein, who owns By Annie, and if you've made any of the By Annie bags, you know what a dynamo she is. And the other teacher was Giuseppe Robato, who is now a designer for Free Spirit Fabrics, but has been working for the past several years as a designer for Andover. And even though the retreat was over, I believe on Monday, Annie and Giuseppe stayed an extra day and came to the Quilt Gallery on Tuesday to each of them gave a 3-hour presentation. So Giuseppe did a presentation in the morning on color theory, and Annie did a presentation in the afternoon about By Annie and about all the bags and how she became a bag designer. And both of the presentations were absolutely phenomenal. The Quilt Gallery did this in order to give back to the community. So tickets were only $5 to come and see these two amazing designers. I went to the store a little bit early to help out and then got to sit on both presentations. This is the first time I'd really had any interaction with Giuseppe. His company name is Juicy Juice, and our store does carry his fabrics. They tend to be a little more modern than I normally use in my quilts, so I hadn't purchased many. I think I've got one or two in my stash. But he did a presentation on color theory that was absolutely amazing. So I've had basic art classes and I know basic color theory, but he really applied it to quilt design and brought the concepts home in a way that I hadn't looked at before. So one of the things that kind of stuck with me after that presentation was he said low volume is a misnomer. We shouldn't call them low volume fabrics. We should call them low value fabrics, because volume and value are two different things. So I'm going to try to remember to call low volume fabrics low value fabrics from now on, but it's hard to get quilters to change once they've adopted something. So I think they're probably going to go forward as low volume fabrics. At the end of his presentation time, he had everybody do an exercise that I thought was absolutely brilliant. There were about 49 women, and he had them count off by sevens, and there were 7 groups, and he assigned each group a different color. And each group was to go out into the store and collect 5 bolts of fabric in their assigned color. And when every group had done that, we piled them up on the front counter, and he went through and created various combinations using his color theory principles, and we got to see what worked and what didn't. I came home with a whole bunch of new ideas, and as usual, I'm wishing that I could find 24 more hours in every day. I would say that if you have the opportunity to take a class or a workshop, or if you're lucky enough to be at a retreat for the weekend, take a class from him. He is really a spectacular teacher. And I'm a teacher, and I don't bestow that praise lightly because I have pretty high standards when it comes to teachers. But he met every one of them. After lunch, we were treated to a presentation by Annie Unrein. And as I said, she's quite a dynamo. She's petite, but powerful, and listening to her was like getting a master class in bag making. She talked about how she became a bag designer, how she developed her soft and stable product, and how the business has grown in the past couple of years with the addition of her son and her daughter-in-law to the business. I visited with her for a few minutes before class, and I told her that I had just finished the Place for Everything tote, and she said, "Congratulations." And then she asked me what I thought, and I said that I had a great deal of fun sewing that bag. So that really was, Tuesday was a wonderful day getting to meet both of them, and I also got to meet Cassandra Zambioni, who is a designer for Wyndham Fabrics, and the store is carrying her new collection, which is called Willow Bend. And Cassandra just moved to Kalispell from Oregon, so we're all looking forward to seeing her more. She is an energetic young mother of 3 kids, and I'm not quite sure where she finds the time, but she does. During Annie's presentation, one of the store staff came to the classroom, and I was sitting in the back of the classroom, and she scooted over to me and she whispered in my ear and she said, "One of your podcast listeners is up at the front counter." So I ducked out of the classroom and I went up to the front counter and I got to meet a lovely woman named Cindy. I think that's right. Cindy and her husband were traveling from Michigan to Seattle, to the Seattle area, and they stopped in Kalispell, and she came into the store, and I don't think when she came in, she was aware that I happened to be there. So it was wonderful to get to meet a podcast listener. We discovered that her husband grew up in Cleveland, where I grew up, and I felt like I got to chat with an old friend. So Cindy, thank you for coming into the store. I am at the store often enough that I tell them that they ought to start charging me rent to be there. But if you happen to come into the store, just ask and see. I might be there. I might be teaching. I might be there playing around doing something else. So Tuesday was a very fun day. And I actually am doing some sewing when I'm not gadding about or out feeding pigs and chickens. I think I mentioned that my beloved travel tote is looking a little bit worn after 30 years, and I'd like to replace it, but I'm having to audition various tote bag patterns to find one that I can modify to make it close to the tote that I've got. And I made a Calland Weekender tote by Sotac Handmade. That's who designed the pattern. It was a fairly quick sew. I think it took me a day and a half. I made it out of some canvas, a Moda canvas print from the store, and the base is some black waxed canvas that the store is now carrying. I don't know who's manufacturing that waxed canvas. I need to find out who the supplier is, but it really is lovely to work with. So I whipped that one up, and I also made a roundabout bag by a company called Cotton Street Commons, and I'll put links to all of these patterns in the show notes. The roundabout bag is a circular bag, and the store had the pattern, and I thought that is really cute. I probably would never carry a circular bag, but it looked like a fun sew. I took the pattern home, and that took me about a day and a half. It was a fun sew. I had a great time making that one, and so it went back to the store as another display sample. I'm going to talk in a little bit about samples and why I'm making all of this stuff, and I came home Tuesday with a kit from the store. They kitted up the Take a Stand pattern by Annie, and they paired it with some of their custom fabric that they have from Hoffman, which is a batik, and it's a Glacier Park themed fabric. It's a red and blue colorway. It's kind of hard to describe it, but if I can find the page on their website, I'll link to it. I started that project a couple of days ago, and I'm hoping to get that finished this weekend. I ran into a little bit of a snag, and I had to get some more fold-over elastic, but I didn't go to town yesterday, so instead of continuing to work on that project, which I couldn't, I pulled out the Amanda Murphy Surged Forest table runner project that I started, and I think I might have mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. This is a table runner project with trees on it, and the trees are decorated with chain stitching with a decorative thread. So I decided to do kind of a holiday/Christmas one. So I bought 5 different fat quarters for the trees, and I pulled out my Glamour 12 weight metallic thread from Wonderfill, and I set up my L890 serger to do chain stitching, and I chain stitched the designs on the fabric and then cut the trees out of the fabric. And when I initially started this pattern, I thought maybe I would teach it as a class at the store, but it took a lot longer than I thought it would. My general rule is however long it takes me to make something, I multiply that times 3, and that's how long the class should be. And I hadn't even finished chain stitching the fabric for the trees, and we were already up to a 12-hour class. So I wasn't sure about this pattern, but I got it out yesterday and I finished it because it needed to be finished. And it's absolutely stunning. You'll probably see pictures of it on Instagram next week. The table runner itself is made. When I went to the quilt store today to pick up the fold-over elastic that I needed, I also got a backing for it. So now I just have to layer it with some batting and get it quilted. And if I don't teach it as a class, it'll go to the store as a sample. The problem is that sometimes when I take things to the store as samples, people want them to be a class. So we'll see. If enough people want to take it as a class, I'll probably figure out how to do that. My Bernina 700 Pro embroidery machine is also sitting in my sewing room, waiting for me to get my act together and start using it. I'm having a little bit of a toolbox fallacy moment with that machine and not wanting to start using it until I have everything that I need. But I have several projects lined up and I just need to take the time to sit down and monkey around with it. So I'm going to finish this take a stand out of the glacier fabric for the store, and I'm going to quilt the Amanda Murphy table runner. But I'm also starting to think about what kind of projects I want to make this fall. And it's time to put away the rayon woven fabrics and get out some of the sweater knits. I am not a huge slave to fashion. I wear what's comfortable, but I do like to wander around stores and see what is popular and trending. That is easier to do when I'm in Seattle, especially if my younger daughter is with me, because Kalispell is something of a backwater and we don't always get the fashions in a timely manner. So sometimes I go to Seattle and I wonder if I am a year or two out of date. I need to go through my fabric and organize some things and get out fabrics that I'm planning to use and put away the fabrics that I probably won't use again until next spring or summer. One of the things that I really want to make myself is a nice dress. I have a terrible time finding dresses that fit because I'm short from my shoulders to my waist, but I'm long from my waist to my crotch. And so my proportions are a little bit weird, and dresses generally don't fit. What I would really like to do is to make either a Wyman Sloper or an Upton dress, the cashmerette patterns, but I would like to cut those out of muslin with generous seam allowances and then take them all with me to Tacoma and have a private class with Ryla Bode at the Sewing and Design School so that she can help me fit them properly and I can end up with a dress that is flattering and that fits me well. But I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to shoehorn that into the schedule, so I'm still working on that. While I was working on that table runner pattern, I listened to this month's podcast episode from the Threads Magazine podcast. And this month's episode was an interview with Kenneth D. King. You might remember that last October I did go to the Sewing and Design School in Tacoma and I took a trouser drafting class from Kenneth. I still need to do something with that pattern, but at least I have it. I learned a tremendous amount from being in that class, and I also learned quite a bit from listening to this podcast episode. I think I'm actually going to go back and listen to it again because I'm sure there are some things that I missed. But at one point in the podcast, he and Carol Frazier were talking about his students at the Fashion Institute of Technology and also a little bit about Project Runway and talking about, joking a little bit about 20-somethings who want to become designers and think that all it takes is being on Project Runway. And he made a comment about having to burn through acres of fabric in order to become proficient at what he does. And it reminded me a little bit of that adage that it takes 10,000 hours of practicing to become a master at something. I'm beginning to wonder if it takes sewing 10,000 yards of fabric to become a master at sewing. So when I talk about a project that I'm working on, people will often ask me, what are you going to do with that? My husband used to ask me that a lot, but he doesn't ask me that anymore because he knows that's not a question I want to answer. Because sometimes I make things to learn a technique. Sometimes I make things because I want to see how that particular pattern designer is presenting that project, how the instructions are written. I learn a lot by reading instructions, believe me. And to some people, this might seem like a wasteful process, but I don't know how else to do it. How would you learn to play the piano if you didn't play the piano? So sometimes I make things and they become class samples now. Sometimes I make samples for the store, and Marianne's thrilled with that because samples help to sell patterns and they help to sell fabric. And they definitely help to sell classes. So I'm trying not to get hung up on the what are you going to do with it question. Quilts can always be donated because somewhere somebody needs to keep warm. Clothing can be donated. I do try to finish things that I make out of fashion fabrics. What's critical is that I am doing the thing, I am making the thing, I am learning the thing so that I can teach the thing ultimately. Carol and Kenneth also talked a little bit about the potential demise of the big four pattern companies, and I don't want to get into that yet until we get more solid information about what that whole bankruptcy process means. But Carol commented that if there are no commercial patterns, how will people learn how to sew? And I kind of scratched my head at that one because indie patterns, I think her feeling was that you don't learn as much from indie patterns. And I'd have to disagree because I think the indie pattern companies have done a great job with the accompanying tutorials and sew-alongs that a lot of them have for their patterns. I've certainly had more instances myself where I've puzzled over the instructions in a Butterick or a McCall's pattern versus ones from an indie designer. So just food for thought there. That was something interesting that I heard. If you have a chance, do go listen to that podcast episode. Listen to all their episodes. Their episodes are extremely well done. So I always learn something. Okay, I think I have chatted long enough. You know, I sit down sometimes and I think, what am I going to talk about? And the next thing I know, half an hour has gone by. So thank you for joining me for this little chatty episode. So many of you, when you send feedback, have said that you like hearing about all the things that are going on in my life. I didn't think my life was that exciting, but here you go. As always, if you want to leave me feedback or send me comments, you can use the fan mail feature. You can leave a comment on the show notes page, and you absolutely can email me, janet@janetzabo.com. I've gotten quite a few lovely emails in the past couple of weeks, some great suggestions for podcast guests, and I'm trying to follow up with all of those. I can't always convince people to be interviewed, but the ones who are willing, I will try to get them on the show. My website is at www.janetzabo.com. There are links to the Big Sky Knitting Designs website where I sell my knitting patterns, as well as a link to the podcast webpage and also a link to my blog. So if you're curious about what I'm doing from day to day, check out the blog. I try to post there 3 to 4 times a week. Most of that stuff eventually ends up on Instagram, but not all of it. So you might want to check out the blog. Thanks again to my listeners who have popped into the store. When you're in Kalispell, it seems like an odd place to visit, but if you happen to be here, and I know there have been a couple of you, just say hi. I know Marianne loves to find out who's been listening to the podcast and hearing about the store. So until next week, I am about to go sew, and I hope that you also will get to go sew something.